let's talk about the word liberty. I mean, it's a word that's at the absolute heart of the American identity, right? It's etched onto monuments, it's woven into the nation's founding documents. But what if? What if the way we understand it today is completely wrong? Let's dive in.
What if the definition we all use today is just a shadow of what the founders actually intended? What if the concept itself has been fundamentally twisted, shifting from this inherent power you're born with to something else entirely? That's really the core question we're going to explore here. So we're going to unpack an argument that the original American definition of liberty has, well, been forgotten, and that it's been replaced by a much older and very, very different idea.
Now, the basis for this whole analysis comes from some really detailed research by an author named Kristen Jones. Her argument is that this incredibly important word has lost its original meaning, and we're going to trace her findings to see how that could have possibly happened.
According to Jones's research, this whole story really starts with a clash, a collision between two completely different ideas of what liberty even is. And while we often mix them up, they are in fact total opposites.
And right here, you can see just how different these two ideas are. On one side, you have the Roman concept, libertas. You can think of that as a revocable status. It's something granted to you by the state, a conditional permission slip that can be taken away. But on the other side, you have the founder's idea, liberty as a natural faculty. This version isn't granted by anyone. It's endowed by a creator. It's inalienable. And it's this inherent power you have to govern yourself. I mean, we're talking about two completely different starting points. So let's zoom in on that Roman idea for a second. Libertas was basically a legal term, and all it really meant was not a slave. But here's the key. This status was a privilege, not a right. It was handed down by an authority. And here's the kicker. Anything that can be granted can also be taken away. Your freedom was, at its core, conditional. The founders, according to Jones, looked at that model and said, no thank you. For them, liberty wasn't some gift from the government, it was a pre-political faculty. It existed before any government was ever formed. It was this inalienable power to govern yourself guided by reason and natural law, which they saw as being endowed by a creator. It was just part of what it meant to be human.
So where did the founders even get such a radical idea? Well, according to Jones, they didn't just pull it out of thin air. Her research actually traces a pretty clear intellectual family tree, a path that they deliberately chose over that old Roman model.
This slide kind of maps out the paper trail. The ideas really start with the foundations of natural law. Basically, the concept that certain rights are just built into the universe and aren't man-made, from thinkers like Aristotle and Aquinas. Then those ideas flow through the Scottish common sense philosophers, like Thomas Reid, who defined liberty as an active power of your own will. And then, here's the crucial link. A teacher named John Witherspoon brought this exact philosophy over to America and taught it at Princeton to a whole generation of leaders, including James Madison. The final step, putting that principle right into the Declaration of Independence. And you don't even have to take my word for it. You can see this idea stated so clearly by the founders themselves. James Wilson, who was a key architect of the Constitution and one of the first Supreme Court justices, he couldn't have been more blunt. He says liberty is a natural right, not a gift from society or a donation of government. I mean, he was directly rejecting those old European ideas and laying down a uniquely American foundation. Okay, so if the founders' definition was so clear and so revolutionary, what happened? This is where the story takes a twist. The next part of Jones's argument lays out how this original meaning was over time subverted and then replaced. Jones argues that this change wasn't just some accident. Instead, it was a series of intentional shifts in legal, academic, and political thinking that slowly pushed the definition of liberty away from a natural power and back toward that old Roman idea of a conditional privilege. This timeline really shows the key stages of that shift. It starts with the founding breakthrough. But then, by the 1870s, this new philosophy called legal positivism starts to take over. It basically argues that natural law is nonsense. Law is just what judges and governments say it is. So liberty is no longer something you're born with. It's just what the courts say it is. Fast forward to the New Deal era, and liberty is seen as this flexible thing that has to adapt to the needs of a huge government bureaucracy. And that, Jones argues, brings us to today, where we see the final stage. Liberty is reframed as just a permission to participate in these vast, managed digital systems. So this brings us right to the heart of the argument and what it all means for us today. This whole historical journey, really, it just boils down to one critical distinction. When you boil it all down, the argument is this. The original American concept of liberty as a natural, inalienable right has been slowly chipped away at and replaced by the very idea it was created to defeat: liberty as a conditional permission, something that is granted and managed by a higher authority.
And that leaves us with one last, really vital question. If liberty is no longer an inherent part of who we are, but instead becomes something like a permission slip, well, the obvious next question is, who gets to hold the clipboard? Who gets the power to grant that permission, and maybe more importantly, to take it away?